Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 9th episode of EPHA's Access to Medicines Dialogues. This is a series of online events. We launched it already last October, so time flies, especially in COVID-19 times. It is our pleasure to host these discussions. We hope that they expand the conversation, and I think this discussion comes at a crucial point, at a crucial juncture, I would say. It is a nice way to kind of finish the first half of the year before the summer break and to take stock of all of the access to medicines related discussions that we've seen, especially since the start of the pandemic. It is an honor, a privilege, and the pleasure to be joined today by Dr. Natasha Antiopardi-Muscat from the WHO Europe. She's the director of the division in charge of health policies and systems for the WHO Europe region member states. Welcome, Natasha. Thank you for your time. I know these are very busy times.
Thank you,
Dr. Audun Haga, the director of the Norwegian Medicines Agency. Welcome, Audun. And of course, a last-minute addition to our program today was Jo de Kock. He needs no introduction. Jo is one of the most knowledgeable payers, if I can call him this way, in Europe. He's in charge for a few more weeks. He's the CEO of the Belgian Risiv Inami and one of the leading figures in the payers community across the European Union. And we will discuss today the Oslo Initiative. The Oslo Medicines Initiative, which started, I would say, I remember the first discussions, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first discussions started already towards the end of 2019. I remember Bjorn Inger Larsen coming to and addressing the EPHA annual Universal Access and Affordability Forum in November 2019 in Brussels. I remember the first discussions we've had also, Natasha, but then of course, the seismic event called COVID-19 happened. And of course, I think that changed a tiny bit everyone's plans. Before we start our conversation, I would like to remind everyone that the session is recorded. You can find this one and all of the previous sessions of EPHA's Access to Medicines Dialogues on our YouTube channel. You can engage on Twitter using the hashtag A2M Dialogues. And of course, the hashtag Oslo Initiative. So let's start with Audun and Natasha. Natasha, who approached whom first? Was it Norway coming to WHO Europe? When did the first discussions happen between Hans Kluge and the Norwegian officials, or Audun? But first, Natasha, if you could take us a bit back in time.
Thank you. Sure, and I'd like to take you a little bit earlier in time, Yanis, which is something that our regional director Hans Kluge always says when he's talking about medicines, is that when he was in election campaign mode, summer of 2019, he visited all the 53 countries. And there were two issues that were echoed consistently by all countries across the region, irrespective of size or income or geography. And these were workforce, which is not our topic today, and access to medicines. And therefore, I think this was very, very clear that it had to be a strong pillar and priority of our European program of work, which we already started working on at the time I was a member of the transition team, late in 2019. And then one of my very first meetings and obligations with WHO actually was to visit the Norwegians very early on in January. I think it was not even officially out of the Christmas season yet, one could say. And that's when the dialogue started, followed very quickly, just 2-3 weeks later, by a high-level meeting, which was convened very rapidly by Jo in Brussels in February. So I think Audun was there at that first meeting in January, and within 3 weeks, Jo had already convened the first meeting. So let me stop here and hand over to the gentleman.
Yes, Audun. What was the motivation of Norway back then?
I think it's important to remember the transparency resolution of 2019 that sort of created the backdrop of this. And our minister, he was very supportive of that resolution, because we had for a long time been very concerned regarding access to the new, very expensive pharmaceuticals due to prioritization issues. I mean, if we should invest in these, we had to take the money from somewhere. And this sort of tended not to be sustainable anymore. And the minister, he was also under, people were complaining that this wasn't transparent, that we sort of negotiated prices that were kept confidential. All this created trouble. So he was very much in favor of the transparency resolution. And then it sort of also depended on individuals knowing each other, I guess.
Natasha mentioned already that you kind of jumped on the opportunity, if I may put it this way. Why? There are so many initiatives happening in parallel. Why do we need this initiative, the Oslo Initiative, from your perspective?
Yes, we started a Norwegian, and thanks for their initiative. They started to launch this initiative before, of course, the European pharmaceutical strategy was on board. But even before, I remember a meeting in the OECD in which the Norwegian minister was also present, where it's, of course, as Natasha has already said, there is a great attention needed with regard to access to medicines. And there is a need, in our view, to set up a work program which is focusing on identifying and elaborating a new and innovative approaches based on collaboration between all stakeholders, and especially with regard to these novel, effective, high-cost medicines which are at stake, but also with regard to other important issues such as shortages and so on. This, in fact, the point or starting point in our Belgian reflection was that there is a need to set up and to create a table in which all the stakeholders can be on board. You will say immediately, yes, in Europe we can do that, but pricing and reimbursement are not issues which are immediately related to the European competences, and we are confronted with member states. And we are looking for tables in which, of course, non-state actors, industry, public officials, also the clinicians can brought on board in order to reflect and creating what is called in the project a social contract. And now I'm I'm ending here my introduction, why we collaborate. And I think it's important to collaborate, and it's a call to other member states to invest in this program we are believing.
And Natasha, it is important to always remind people that we're talking about WHO Europe region, so it goes beyond the European Union. I think this is an important nuance. If you can tell a bit more about that, because we've seen in recent years a lot of initiatives of collaboration within the EU, but I think we need to build this bridge with the wider WHO Europe region.
Thank you, Yannis. And of course, that is a very important aspect, and also brings with it a deeper challenge because of the diversity that we have across the region. But I would like to turn that question on its head and say, why should we have such a huge diversity when it comes, for example, to access to medicines? Why should we have such a huge diversity when it comes to life expectancy because of non-communicable diseases that we can treat rather easily? So I think what we are talking about is that we really want to create a paradigm that when we talk even with countries like Norway about access to new medicines that we know come with a hefty price tag, it's not about only for countries like Norway and Belgium, but we really want to make sure that these innovations are available to all those who can benefit from them. And this means that all of a sudden you're also looking at a much larger market. And I think this is the fundamental difference. Of course, yes, the European Union has had the opportunity and the potential to talk and to rehearse the arguments and the ground now for some years. And I think this has put them, for example, into an advantageous position that during the COVID pandemic, they were able to pool their purchasing power together and strike a good deal for access to vaccines. But as the regional office for WHO in Europe, we have a situation of haves and have-nots, which is rather demarcated actually very much by those who have been able to get onto the European Union procurement mechanism. You know, the situation for a small country like the one I'm from, Malta, at the time of the H5N1 pandemic was totally different. I can tell you that. But what we need to do now is we need to go beyond, and we need to use these opportunities that have been created as an example to learn, so that we don't go back to how we were before. So for me, although the Oslo Medicines Initiative was conceived pre-pandemic, at a time when already access to medicines was very much on the agenda, it's not a question of going back to when we started that initiative, because the world has changed so much, so many things have happened, and the possibility and the potential and the political awareness of the issues that people like yourself have been putting on the agenda in the past years has changed dramatically.
Absolutely, and thank you for touching upon these the topics and the impact of the pandemic on this debate. We will come back to that, but before that, I would like to go to Audun and ask you, Audun, also for the sake of our viewers, if you could take us a bit through the topics, the priorities of the Oslo Initiative. Which are the areas where you would like to see progress in the coming months and by 2022?
The background, Jannis, is that not even rich Norway we're able to pay up for the very expensive new pharmaceuticals, which means that our patients do not get access, which then probably also goes for a lot of patients in Europe. And when we have a system for innovation that results in patients not getting access, then that system needs amendment, really. So we need to change. And the goal of the initiative is to create sort of a neutral platform which WHO can contribute to. And the goal is that beneficial pharmaceuticals should, of course, be available to everyone that can benefit from them. I mean, that's the obvious intent of a social contract, so to speak, between society and industry. So we need to discuss different possibilities, come out of our trenches and try to understand each other, try to understand the different needs, find the bottlenecks, and then try to amend the system and create something new and better that actually works.
And since the start of the pandemic, how do you see this dynamic evolving? Because we're talking about a new social contract, right, between the industries and broader society, patients, health systems. How has this dynamic evolved and changed since the start of the pandemic, in your opinion, in Europe?
Okay, there's no direct link between the pandemic, of course, and the Oslo Initiative, but I think we can take some learnings out of the COVID pandemic. I think this COVID pandemic has clearly shown that, of course, pooling of resources, cooperation between each other, both on the human and financial way, I think can have and creating a shared approach can deliver a lot of things. Secondly, I think with regard to the COVID crisis, of course, we demonstrated also this pooling of knowledge, evidence, expertise, and solidarity also. Solidarity is back, as the United States are back, as to quote Joe Biden. But I think we have to put this solidarity again on the table, and I think that's one of the learnings to stress this and to stress this value. And third, I think out of the COVID came, of course, the need of preparedness, not only with regard to viruses, but also for future developments. And that's also the case in this pharmaceutical setting, in the pharmaceutical ecosystem. With regard to pipelines, you will see that an enormous amount of gene and cell therapies are coming. We have to treat them on an appropriate way with pricing mechanisms which are linked to clinical benefits and so on. This is a new approach we are looking for. And I think the dynamics which are coming out of the COVID crisis, and also the dynamics to review and reflect on our health systems, I think it's clear. And I think now there is a momentum. And with regard, of course, with the European Commission initiatives, there should be an alignment. And it's clear also, and I think Natasha can confirm that clearly, that of course there should be alignment between all these initiatives. Otherwise, we are playing puzzles. That's not the aim. The aim is that different initiatives could be aligned in order to come to what we call a social contract, which is not only a high mess in which declarations are coming out, in which everybody is supporting each other. No, it should be leading to concrete actions and to real commitments.
Are you, Audun, are you worried by this politicization that we see of pharma? Are you worried by the fact, on the same topic of the dynamic, are you worried by the fact that nowadays, and in light of the pandemic, pharma CEOs pick up the phone and they talk directly to heads of state and governments? Is this something that creates opportunities, or is it something that you see and worries you?
I guess both. When it comes to your points, we're back to transparency again. That is really important, that nothing happens in the shade, but that it is open. People talking to each other, that in my opinion is very positive, given its transparency. But it is also possibilities, I guess, that a lot of issues are brought out in the spotlight now and put on the agenda, which also contributes to this momentum that something must change, something must happen.
Yes, and Natasha, you know that as civil society, and I think this is also what you heard from not only by us at EPHA, but by a series of organizations when you organize that excellent consultation of non-state actors talking about expert civil society, the issue of transparency overall in pharmaceuticals is a big point. And I know that also Audun mentioned the WHO transparency resolution. I guess this is an area that you would like to see some concrete action in the coming months and years, also within the Oslo Medicines Initiative.
Right, Yanis. Actually, transparency is one of the 3 pillars of the Oslo Medicines Initiative, the other 2 being unity and solidarity. And of course, there are 2 ways you can approach the discussion towards transparency. You can make it a purely mechanistic discussion that looks at price, and you can have studies. And in fact, we are working at the moment with the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies that are actually carrying out this work, so to say, examining the effects of price transparency in other industries and looking at lessons learned and what this means for pharma. But there is also a second element, which I think has really risen to the fore during this pandemic, which is around the trust and the people's trust. And I think we are at a point, I'd like to think that we are slightly at an irreversible point. And I think that certain things that have happened over the past months mean that we are really finding the fertile ground now to move towards this new paradigm. As the classic public policy making theorists would say, I mean, the problem existed before COVID. We've been working in several groups within the EU, beyond the EU, with WHO to come up with the technical policy solutions to what is a very complex and wicked scenario. But in a way, the past months have really provided that political awareness that was needed beyond the niche constituency of industry, expert society, and payers, such that these issues have really become issues now that are in the language of, let's say, the educated lay public, with all those people who follow contemporary affairs on a daily basis. So I think that this has really provided that added impetus and push. This is not to say that we should be naive or we should think that the solutions beyond the political rhetoric are going to be easy ones, but this is to say that these issues are now on the agenda of constituencies and people who were never perhaps so familiar with the intricacies and the complexities as they were before. And perhaps later on, I would also like to talk a little bit about our Pan-European Commission on Health and Sustainable Development being chaired by Mario Monti. But back to you.
Yeah, Natasha, I want to challenge you a bit, if I may. Why will the industries play ball at this stage? How confident or how optimistic are you that pharmaceutical companies, which are right now, in light of the pandemic, quite strong? I mean, we see, as I said, politicization of pharma, which obviously offers opportunities, not only risks. But how confident are you that your interlocutors, your pharma interlocutors, will play ball and will change their attitude and come to the table with some truly innovative and socially progressive, if I may put it this way, thinking?
Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, Yanis. So you could play this recording a year from now, and I could have gotten it wrong. But let me start by saying that I have been dealing now with the pharma industry in many ways for the past 25 years. And I think we are realizing that there is a common understanding of the challenges that lie ahead because of the way in which even science, as Jo was saying earlier, is changing. And the recipes and formulas for marketing, distribution, production that existed in the past are no longer the ones that will see us into the future, so to say. So I think there is an element which is driven by science to start with, which, as you know, is always about targeting smaller populations, etc., etc. That brings with it, of course, an economic element too, which the industry is looking at. But I think there is this third element now, which is really on the agenda, which is questioning the whole access to medicines at a global level in a way that it hasn't really been questioned in recent years before, even by countries who perhaps haven't questioned certain things before also. So I think we are really very much on shifting ground, whether it's member states who are pairs, whether it's the scientists on the cusp of innovation, and whether it's the pharmaceutical industry. As WHO, what is our place? What is our position? I think more and more it's becoming extremely evident that there is the need for someone to bring all of these constituencies together as far as possible in a manner that allows people to listen to each other, to speak to each other, and to jointly try to find solutions going forward. So I would like to say that at this point in time, today, with what I am seeing around me, I would like to strike a note of optimism that there is at least the realization that some things have to change and that people will be willing, and at least from what we have seen so far, even as WHO in terms of the engagement with this initiative and with the industry counterparts, that there is a willingness to sit down to really think, how can we fix this?
On this note of optimism, Audun, let's fast forward to 1 year from now. Where are we going to be with the Oslo Initiative in June 2022? What are the next steps in the process?
With a big meeting in Oslo, Janis.
In person.
Hopefully before that we will have had more consultations, more discussions. We will have developed background documents. And I think the process will have run further on. And just to come back to your previous question to Natasha, I totally agree with her. I think there is an understanding also on the industry side that the system is not delivering, which means that it's a question of how the industry is perceived. So that will also probably affect how the industry will perform long term. So I think they are willing to discuss so that we can come together and discuss this. And I think that also is reflected in the consultations we had with industry, but you're probably coming back to that.
Yes, I want to go also to Jo and ask him, you know, for years, Jo, we've been saying, how do we move from a paradigm where we move from passive payers to empowered buyers? How encouraged are you by the developments that we've seen? Natasha already mentioned the EU joint procurement for vaccines against COVID-19. How encouraged are you by these developments? And of course, if you can give us a bit of an update also on what's going on within Benelux, since we have you here with us today.
Okay, I'm not pessimistic neither. I'm not a super optimist by DNA, but nevertheless, I think there are some elements which allow us to say that we can make progress and we should make progress. As you said, more and more payers not consider themselves anymore as passive payers, but as buyers of innovative solutions for health, which is another thing than buying pills. It's buying treatments, and treatments, of course, also science is leading to combination therapies and so on. I see in the chat it's what's an important one. We did recently also analysis about the price tags and the link with, of course, the transparent methods which are reflecting the clinical benefits of drugs. I think it's an important one. Of course, we cannot neglect that we should not fall in the trap in which, of course, the classical trials are put away and replaced by real-world evidence, or so-called real-world evidence. There also, with this evaluation, trusted parties could play a role, and moreover, with the complexity of analytics, it should be done more. I think transparency, I agree with Natasha, that is a broad notion. It's not only about prices, but it's also to see, okay, or incentives public authorities are giving to the industry. What are they linked to the results and to the outcome? It's also a reflection, of course, transparency, not ex post, but ex ante. Therefore, and with regard to Beneluxa, we a spin-off of Beneluxa is the International Horizon Scanning Initiative. I think one of the elements there is, of course, to be prepared, as I said in my introduction, to be prepared and seeing what's coming up, to be aware about the evolutions and sending signals to industry together with other buyers and to other payers and other authorities to see what's happening and how can we have and start early dialogues about the way we can handle these issues, but also sending out signals about priorities. Not every drug is, of course, linked to unmet medical need. And I think the Beneluxa, the first one, is the spin-off, which is, I think now, representing 8 countries with 73 million people. It's the International Horizon Scan Initiative, and you will see later this week an announcement about the way we will set up a database and also realize high impact reports, which will be open to the members, but also to the other member states in order to have this discussion, a possibility to discussion at the earliest stage as possible. Secondly, with regard to Benelux themselves, of course, we are continuing our analysis, and recently you could read on our website of Benelux that we did some important assessment about Zolgensma and other high-tech medicines. This collaboration is still it's active and more active as before. Recently, we had our yearly steering committee in which we announced also, of course, our strategic positioning in the future, which is leading also to cooperation in with other players and other groups and initiatives which are, and in that sense, the WHO can play a role as combining this network of networks, bringing together also this different initiatives, of course, oriented to the same targets we have already mentioned: transparency, equity, and solidarity. I think that's important. But we are still in discussions about joint process pricing and reimbursements and so on. This we are continuing. Of course, in the meanwhile, on the political front, ministers have changed. And as we have to remember, of course, that it is not only a collaboration between agencies or public authorities at themselves, but it's a political commitment to strengthen also the power of member states with regard to the development of pharmaceutical policy.
And that gives me an excellent opportunity, thank you, Jo, to ask Natasha. On one hand, we have the industries, obviously, and other stakeholders. Let's group them, the non-state actors. What about member states? Are you encouraged that there is still momentum, or that there is indeed the political desire and capacity also from member states to actively, proactively support your initiative, the joint initiative with Norway? Are you worried, or are you indeed optimistic that the political determination, not just will, is there?
Thank you, Yanis. Well, what can I say? A couple of weeks ago, we had the World Health Assembly, and I was encouraged by the number of countries, also from the European region, but not only, who took the floor to talk about issues relating to medicines. So I think the topic is still very, very much in the minds and hearts of our politicians, albeit at the moment, for the past weeks and months, the focus has been very much COVID related for obvious issues, but that is not just with medicines, it is with everything else, that we need to remember that our ministries of health, whose capacity even at the best of times in small and middle-sized countries is often under severe strain, let alone over the past year. But I think what we are going to see actually is a return with a vigor, so to say, to this topic, in light of the experiences, I would say, that have been gained through the past months in dealing with COVID, in the light of the fact that we know that over the past months in many countries, a backlog of treatments, services to be delivered, non-communicable diseases has surfaced, changing epidemiology. We know, for example, that mental health and well-being is definitely one of the issues very much on the radar. And I guess what we need to encourage also is this strategic review of unmet needs that we have, and that we really, again, over there, sit down together with science, with industry, and understand where we need to focus and prioritize. So my understanding is that whenever medicines and access to medicines and access to innovative treatments is on the agenda, this is really an agenda item that still is very much on the minds of the member states. Perhaps the focus has shifted slightly because of COVID, but I have no doubt that we are going to see this really coming back. And we do know, for example, that also at the World Health Assembly, non-communicable diseases was very much on the agenda, with, for example, particular attention also being given to diabetes and access to diabetes medicines.
You know, for us in Brussels and from EPHA's perspective and our members, we've been following obviously very closely the ongoing discussions around the future of the European Health Union, right? And the issue of giving more power or more competencies to Brussels over health policies. But what we see at the same time is that there is a strange conflation of industrial policy with health policies. To put it simply, in some cases, health policies are overshadowed by or very much confused and mixed up with industrial competitiveness policies. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and if you have the same concern to make sure that we strengthen the health policy angle, but we do not confuse it with boosting the industry's competitiveness. Is that something that you have on your radar?
So, as you know, Yanis, even prior to my time in WHO, I have always been a strong advocate for the European Union to do more on health, even in my previous role as president of EPHA. So, of course, to me, this still remains very, very important. And whenever I am asked, my answer, should the EU do more for health, is a very clear and resounding yes, it should. At the same time, of course, what I also know firsthand is that an organization like WHO, whose mandate and constitution is entirely focused on protecting and promoting health and well-being, will always have to, by its very nature, place health as the supreme objective and priority, not only in the time of a crisis, but always and at all times for everyone. So I think my message over here is that we see that actually as WHO, we can also lend our voice and our weight to make sure that health remains firmly on the agenda, even in the European Union, whilst we are glad to see that it has been on the agenda at the time of crisis. I think what will be more important and more interesting, and here as WHO we continue also to support our colleagues in the European Commission and also working with the other institutions, is to look forward, to look at the recovery process. And perhaps here I can also explain a little bit about why we launched the Pan-European Commission. I mean, basically, the commission was convened by the regional director with the specific aim of rethinking policy priorities in the light of lessons learned from the pandemic. And I think when we started out with this exercise, we had maybe an idea of where it might go. Can I just say that it's gone far, far wider than we imagined even when we started thinking of this almost a year ago. And I think one of the really important lessons to emerge from this was that it was really an opportunity to bring around the table a constellation of individuals from very different parts of the European region, but more importantly, with very different backgrounds. And I think what is really beautiful is that now we see people from backgrounds in banking, in finance, in development, really talking and understanding health and advocating for how we put health on the agenda going forward. But what is very interesting is that sometimes this is seen from a very different perspective to the traditional health systems and public health perspective that we have been working with over the past years. And the beauty, I think, is that we really all need perhaps to take a step back and think of a different approach to solve some of the long-standing problems, rather than coming with more of the same, because we know that more of the same hasn't been enough. And this is, I think, what we're trying to do also with the Oslo Medicines Initiative.
Yes, correct. I think we're past the point of the discussions we've had over the past 5 years, and now we're at the point of very concrete, operational, actionable solutions and recommendations. We have a lot of questions and a strong interest from our viewers online, and I see questions popping up on my screen, and thank you very much for that. I see, Audun, since I have you here, there is a question. What is the correlation, if any, or between Benelux and the Nordics? Or to put it differently, are you trying to replicate what Benelux is doing in the Nordics, this kind of collaboration? Is it something on your radar?
Definitely on our radar. And I think, yes, these initiatives are, in a way, two different ones. You have the bottom-up initiatives like the Benelux, Finose, and then you have the top-down initiatives like the UNETA and the regulations and things like that. And this, I guess we are at a moment where we have a lot of parallel initiatives. But my hope is that these will grow together so that we can create a much stronger system. And in my opinion, it is very important that we do work sharing and that we go together, because then of course we will be stronger and a better opponent or counterpart to the industry, more same demands, same questions, easier for everybody in that respect.
I think also, Jo, what Audun is talking about right now is essentially what you also mentioned before, the sharing of information amongst member states in order to have some kind of the same baseline, the same starting point, so that you, from your side, from the public interest side, let's say, from the member state side, you're also better prepared, like companies do. You know, companies have their boardrooms, so you want to copy, like imitate their organization as well, their homework in a way. Looking a bit ahead, but not 5 years down the road, but let's say over the next year or two max, what will the priorities be of these regional intergovernmental initiatives such as Benelux? Will you focus on specific therapeutics? Is it something new that you learned from the EU joint procurement for vaccines, maybe?
For the moment, in Benelux, we are not yet a reflection on procurement procedures. And I think, of course, what's important to these collaborations and cooperation structures and networks is that, of course, they are linked also with when they are intervening in the real procedures and not being discussing fora. We are trying to deliver concretely and concrete dossiers and concrete initiatives and submissions of manufacturers to getting a common position. That's the first one. What are you thinking about? The second thing is, okay, have we the same view? Can we set up common assessments? Can we formulate before common questions we have when we are looking to this file? Have we sufficient information? Do you have more information? Should we ask more information? Is it useful to create, for instance, registries? Why not? Who will pay for them? And it's, for instance, in the submissions we have taken until to the end, there's a clear commitment also from the policy side to going the way together, and I think that's very important. And exchange of information, of course, and that's linked to transparency, is an important one. Our Belgian law is allowing us that when we are in this official procedure, we can exchange information, which is, of course, a novelty. And we are trying, of course, to strengthen our position as an intelligent buyer in order to have a countervailing discussion, but also pooling resources, because we are entering in more and more complex elements, and therefore I think this cooperation is needed, but they cannot leaving behind the broader strategic dimensions, as Natasha mentioned already, the monitoring of, for instance, health divide, which is created by not equal access to medicines, which can be based on different factors. But there are some elements to say, okay, they will not be over, but they will form a network. When you say what will happen in 3 years, I think that all these initiatives will still be functioning as far the ones I know, but they will be have a broader interaction with each other. And what we should do also is having interactions with other initiatives and other structures which are on board. For instance, we have the reflection on orphan medicines. Of course, this is necessary to redefine the incentives which are inside. But what's more important is also to see the clinical benefits and to make bridges to, for instance, the European reference networks. Broader cooperation also with the European Medicines Agency is, of course, an important one. And it's linked, of course, when the more we are prepared and in an early stage, the more we can do things together. I think that's an important message.
And Jo, would you like to see the EU buying more medicines together?
I don't know. That's but I think concretely, what should be my dream in one way or another? Mm-hmm. That, for instance, for small markets, for orphan diseases, there should be more cooperation and more initiatives from Europe. This is not changing the market, but is offering access to medicines, and with the countervailing power of negotiation on the other side, in which the different member states are associated and supported by European reference networks. I have in mind, in that sense, a good opportunity to set up within 10 years a more cooperative approach in which Europe can play a role, name it procurement or buying these drugs on one way or another, but in a critical view together with sufficient health technology assessment behind and a monitoring of clinical benefits, which is going on. I think there are possibilities, and these are, of course, when we are developing a strategy, it's not for the next year, it's not for the next budgetary exercise, but it's for the upcoming 5-10 years. And I think these lines should be clear in the social contract which will be discussed in the upcoming months.
There is a question for you now, Jo, about the International Horizon Scanning Initiative. Will it be the database, the information that is going to come out of this Horizon Scanning Initiative? Is it going to be available only to the participating member states, or will other payers also have access, or will they be able to gain access to this wealth of information that the initiative will produce?
That's depending, of course, also on the financial side. I'm not a member of the board of IC, but of course they will reflect on that. And of course, we are looking to outreaching, of course, the possibilities to other member states. And even when member states are not able to participate, we have talked about the 53 countries in the European WHO forum. Why not integrate some methodologies which make able that people can have, of course, access to the database. Where there will be more public access is the high impact reports, in which we say, okay, we have a signal here, there is a high promising drug which is coming. Okay, how can we react? And therefore we can send the signals, and on this basis, of course, these networks can coming together. You will read an announcement later this week. I think the 18th of June, IC will communicate about their database.
Excellent. We look forward to that. I'm sure that that's already a piece of news coming out of this session today. Natasha, we have 10 minutes left. I want to ask you the same question I asked before, Audun. Where are we going to be with the Oslo initiative? We were hopefully going to be in Oslo next June. What will make you happy? What is your best case scenario out of this process? Are you aiming at the declaration? Are you aiming at some concrete commitments? What are your thoughts also beyond June 2022?
Thank you, Yanis. Yes, of course, I'm hoping that in a year from now, we will have a declaration that, let us say, WHO Euro would have given birth to as a midwife. But of course, the parents then are the member states and the non-state actors. And therefore, it is very important that in this declaration, it's not just a commitment in principle, but there is a clear also way forward for the subsequent steps that can be put in place. I think we need to be realistic and pragmatic, and I think even small and good steps in the right direction can help us to continue to get the momentum then for more, because success breeds success. And I think what is important is that we really take a systemic approach to this. At the moment, sometimes I have the feeling that we have tried to tackle this really by focusing on one aspect at a time, when in a way this is like a wall in which if you remove one stone, all the other stones are going to shift. So you can't carry out only a change in one part of the system without impacting a change on the other parts. And I think this is the challenge of the nature of the system that we have. And therefore, it could be that we even decide to focus on a trial basis on some products or some disease areas, even as Jo was saying earlier. Of course, we can't ignore everything else that is going on. There is the Cancer Initiative, there are the European reference networks, and all these do provide entry points. I also hope very much that whatever we come up with is a commitment that goes beyond the European Union and has benefits. It has to have benefits, and it has to talk to all the 53 member states in the region. And then to be a little bit more ambitious and to answer one of the questions that also arose in the chat, I hope that by demonstrating some successful outcomes within the European region, and by successful outcomes, I mean that there would be new products being launched that would be available without delay in all the countries that need them, and that are priced in such a way that they can be accessed by those different countries. This is what success would look like. But of course, we need to remember that a number of countries still also need a lot of support in setting up the regulatory frameworks, the procurement frameworks, and the post-marketing surveillance, so to say, and setting up those systems to collect the data. We are dealing with products here which are very different to what we have dealt with in the past. And this therefore requires an investment in a whole system and apparatus. And I think that here again, what we are going to be looking at is how we can create and cultivate, even at national levels, partnerships that mirror what would have been done at the European level, so that we can ensure that the change is really sustained and implemented at country level.
Absolutely. Natasha, you said that, well, what we see right now happening with COVID-19 vaccines, at least across the EU, is the fact that they are available, and they have become available thanks to the EU joint procurement across the EU at the same time. And this question of availability, this equitable availability, is something that we would like to see also in other areas, for instance, when it comes to orphan drugs. But I think on a broader point, the question of equity in health, and this is something which is very high also on the radar of EPHA when it comes to equity for vulnerable populations as well, and how do we guarantee that nobody is left behind, even when it comes to the national vaccination plans. And I think that the fact that governments found themselves on several occasions dependent on companies' business plans had an effect on the design even of the vaccination, the national vaccination plans across even the EU, let alone the broader WHO European region. And of course, that for us will remain a priority. And there we see opportunities also when it comes to the mandate of the ECDC and other ongoing policy discussions. Audun, I want to ask you, what do you reply to those who say that, okay, everything is fine, it's a very good initiative, this Oslo Medicines Initiative, but how can you expect to change things when Europe is very much dependent on big pharma, and the heart of that system is on the other side of the Atlantic, and this is something that we saw also with the development of COVID-19 vaccines. What is your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's a globalized system, globalized industry, and it's a small world. So I guess we are all in the same boat, and one of the important aspects with the Oslo Initiative is to get this realization that we cannot just continue as is. We need to change something. And we want to create this environment of trust, an environment where all parties dare to come up with ideas that might be naive, that might even be stupid, but to create something productive. And I think we are
a bit of blue sky thinking. Is that what you're saying? And a bit of blue outside the box blue sky thinking also.
Very much so, Janis. And I think we sort of hit that in this consultation. I just want to mention some points just to get concrete. And one of them was the importance of verbs and definition. When we're talking about transparency, from our point of view, it is more transparency to be able to justify the price towards the taxpayers who are putting up the money, while the industry, they heard transparency as giving away the prices so that they can be lowered by price referencing. Two very different meanings of the same word. So we need to get around that. And one other point is tier-based pricing, differentiated pricing. I think there are a lot of points and topics to be explored there, because I can understand that the industry wants to have different prices. But that means that we have to get around parallel import-export, which means that we have to get around free flow of goods, which means that this will be complicated. But at least we need to start talking about it and exploring it and trying to find possible way forward. It can be procured at different prices, or it can be procured at one price and then differentiated on the other side, on the public side. No obvious solutions, a lot of pitfalls, but we need to start talking about it. Another point that didn't come up with industry is the pooled procurement, that we go together as buyers and that we help payers get better payers. I think also that is an important topic to discuss.
Thank you, Audun, for this snapshot. Jo, I'll come to you. One final minute in our discussion. What would you like to see in June 22 coming out of the Oslo meeting? In 1 minute, because we need to wrap up. I know you're all very busy people.
In 1 minute, I hope we can make some change and not, which is differentiating us of the continuation of a static quo. I think we should make progress on clear commitments, on clear action points, on elements which are making the difference. It's quoting Mariana Mazzucato, it's like a moonshot we should try to prepare. And it's, of course, the whole ecosystem which is related to that. Also, not only pricing of the medicines, but also the innovation strategy and so on. So I think this is a starting point, and let's be Oslo the starting point of a moonshot in the pharmaceutical scene and for the pharmaceutical ecosystem.
Excellent. I knew you could deliver the closure of our discussion today. Dr. Natasha Zopardi-Muscat, Dr. Naudun Haga, Jode Kok, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. This is just the beginning of, or is just another stop in this very long journey. At EPHA, we're here to support you as we've done throughout the years. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Enjoy your summer. We'll be back in the fall. In the meantime, you can watch all of the Access to Medicines Dialogues on the European Public Health Alliance YouTube channel. And thank you to our viewers for their engagement. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.